1 minute, waiting for everyone to join. Just let me know if you can hear me. If you could write in the chat below, that would be great. We're going to start in just about 60 seconds. Thank you. Kanika, thank you for. All right. Hi, everyone. So, as I said, I'm Dave. Some of you might already know me. I'm a senior tutor here at examPAL. And welcome to our webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about two of the most confusing topics on the exam, which are data sufficiency and critical reasoning. And we're here because these two topics have another thing in common besides being really hard, and that's that they can both be improved very quickly. And the thing is that these topics have a secret sauce to them, which we're here to talk about what it is. So before we begin, for the sake of you guys who may not yet be familiar with examPAL's GMAT course, so just to introduce us, what examPAL does is uses crowd wisdom of over 10,000 students from more than 130 countries to find the best way to solve each question. And what we're actually doing is measuring which of all possible solutions are the fastest and the fastest for whom. Now, this means using machine learning to study how students think and personalize both the questions and the solutions to each user's learning profile and the strengths and weaknesses. Meaning not just giving the student easier or harder questions, but actually learning how the student thinks and finding the fastest solutions that match your own way of thinking. And this we call our palgorithm. You guys can open a free account right now and just start watching all of our GMAT lessons for free at exampal.com/GMAT, anytime, anywhere, on whatever platform you want. And students who choose to upgrade their account for as low as $30 can use our practice system and our palgorithm technology. And just spoiler alert at the end, for those of you who are interested, at the end of the webinar, we're going to give all of the webinar attendees a special discount as a token of our appreciation. Don't miss it. So, one more thing before we dive into the real stuff. Let's just make sure we all know what we're using here. So I see you guys found the chat button on top, on the bottom, sorry, which is, that's great. So there you can, first of all, there, please update me if, for example, you stop hearing me at any point, so I'll know and I won't be talking to myself. And also, if you don't understand anything, you can ask there. And if I have time, I'll address it out loud. And if not, I have here with me Erez and Jack from examPAL, and they're going to help me and write and we'll answer you writing down. Also, you guys can ask each other, of course. So just to try it out, if someone could again just tell me that you hear me, so I'll be sure, that would be great on the chat. And another thing is that we have here, if you look on the top right corner of your screen, you have kind of four arrows pointing out. So you can press that and go full screen if you want. Although in that case, you won't be seeing the chat. And one last thing is we're going to have polls every once in a while. We're going to stop and do polls. And then we're going to pause and gather all the answers before moving on. So just to try this out and make sure you guys are with me, we're going to do our first poll. Sorry, not that one. Oh, no, it is that one. So what is the most common mistake in data sufficiency questions? And is it guessing? Is it not looking at each of the statements separately? Is it data overload? Is it overthinking all possible options? And is it the data given is insufficient to solve the question? So I'm going to give you guys another 40 seconds or so. Get your answers in, and we'll go over it together. Okay, great. So pretty much all of you voted, and you should be seeing the results on your screen right about now. And a pretty large majority, I would say. Yeah, guys, you lost voice because I paused it for a second. Sorry, I wasn't explicit about that. So as we can see now about on our poll, most of you guys said not looking at each of the statements separately. Um, and in our experience, that is the reason. In fact, based on our data from over 10,000 students, that's what it's mostly about. And we're going to talk about that in a minute when we start talking about our keys to 5 keys to perfect data sufficiency. So just before we dive in, real quick, let's talk just really fast about what makes data sufficiency harder. So hard, and harder than other questions. And the first thing is what we call abstract concepts, right? Data sufficiency oftentimes asks us to use abstract logical thinking. And in fact, we don't have to solve questions, which is what we're kind of hardwired to do, but we have to use logic to figure out whether questions can be solved, which is simply not what we're used to doing. So in order to solve this, in order to solve all questions, in fact, what we in examPAL use, we call the palgorithm. And the palgorithm basically means something pretty simple, which is every question on the GMAT exam has 3 different possible answer strategies. And the first one is precise, and it's pretty much the most straightforward one that you've probably been thinking of, which is you'd arrive at an exact answer using high school capabilities. What are high school capabilities? Simplifying an equation, applying a grammatical rule, just basically getting a question and solving it. And this is what most of us are used to doing most of the time. However, in GMAT, often that's not what we need to be doing. We need to be doing something else. For example, sometimes we have to use an alternative approach. We use tools that get us quickly to the answer, even if we can't tell how we got there precisely. For example, using numbers, using the answers, estimating. All these are tools that oftentimes are very useful. And the third one, which in fact is the most useful in data sufficiency questions, is what we call logical. Here we implement some kind of logical rule that can't be found in the question itself, something we know from before, to kind of cut through it and get to the answer. So I hope this right now is probably a little bit abstract, but we're gonna be talking about all 3 of these today, both with data sufficiency and critical reasoning. And now let's start talking about data sufficiency up close. So as you guys said, the biggest problem people have with data sufficiency is that they don't look at each of the statements separately. And this really, really confuses a lot of us. So here, I have up on the screen here, basically, if you remember one thing about data sufficiency here today, remember this. When we solve data sufficiency, what's most important is to remember to look at the first statement on its own. After that, look at the second statement on its own without the first statement. And after that, and only if needed, we look at both of the statements together. That's really kind of, in a nutshell, what we have to remember about data sufficiency, and all the tips we're going to be talking about kind of derive from that. So without further ado, let's start looking at questions together and see how these apply. So the first key we call ACE the A's. And here's the first question we're going to look at today. Now, before we begin, a quick reminder of what the answer choices in data sufficiency even mean, right? So, and I'm sure you guys know this, but I'm just going to say this in case anyone is, is new in his studies and isn't sure yet. So don't even look at the text yet of the question, just look at the answers. A means the first statement, statement number 1 here, and only the first statement is sufficient to answer the question. B means the second statement and only the second statement. In this case, a squared is larger than 64 is sufficient. Combine means combining the 2 statements and only combining them gives us sufficient information. Divided means each statement on its own gives us sufficient information to solve the question. And E means impossible. Even when combining all the information, we can't solve the question. And remember, at no point are we expected, nor should we actually answer the question. What we have to do merely is figure out if solving it is possible with the provided information. Now, in fact, we've found in cases where questions were solved using the precise approach, which means actually doing the math and solving it, remember, students are about 26% slower and 19% more likely to get a wrong answer compared to those who use the logical approach. So keep all that in mind. And now let's look at this question. And again, don't even try and solve it yet, but think for a second. Quick survey. Which accessory do you think would be most useful to help solve this question? Would it be masking tape to block out parts of the screen? Would it be a calculator? Would it be colorful pens? Would it be a multiplication table? And would it be a stopwatch? I'm going to give you guys about a minute. I'm going to turn the sound off. Don't be afraid. I'm here. Get your votes in. I'll be back in. All right, get your last votes in. Those of you who haven't done it yet, I'm going to give you a few more seconds and wrap it up. All right, so now you should be seeing it on your screen, the results. And I would say, pretty equal mix here of all the answers, which is interesting. So let's just talk about it for a second. Those of you who marked a calculator or a multiplication table, I agree, these indeed would be useful props in general in the GMAT, but the truth is we shouldn't actually use them in this case. As for colorful pens or a stopwatch, nice to have, but definitely not necessary. Now the answer that I meant at least is masking tape, and let me explain why by solving the question. So what we're going to do here is use the logical approach, which is generally, again, the strategy that we use in data sufficiency questions, since data sufficiency questions are by their nature logical questions. So let's start by looking at statement 1 here. B is smaller than 8 and larger than 0. Now, first of all, knowing that B is positive, larger than 0, tells us that A must be positive as well, right? Since positive times positive equals positive, 64. Second thing is when we get range, it's often useful to have an extreme. So let's pretend for a minute that B is in fact 8. The largest, well, actually it can't be 8, but that's the extreme that it could be. So let's pretend that it's 8. And if that's the case, A is also going to be 8. But B, as we know, is not 8. It's less than 8, definitely, which means that A has to be larger than 8. And that's our solution. That's it. Statement 1 is sufficient, meaning we're going to cross out options B, C, and also E. Okay, now let's look at statement 2. A squared is larger than 64. Well, okay, since we know A has to be positive, this means A has to be larger than 8, right? Well, hold on, wait a minute. I just lied to you because we don't know that A is positive. This is knowledge we have based on the first statement. Remember, because B is positive, A also has to be positive. But we have to put that aside now. Looking at statement 2 on its own, A could be -9 just as much as it could be 9. And therefore, statement number 2 is insufficient, and there we have it. A is our answer. And this brings us to key number 1. When 1 is enough, we should never add it to 2. And this is why I said masking tape would be useful, at least to me, because for me, I know that if I could, I would block out statement number 1 entirely and look at statement 2 with fresh eyes. Now, this isn't very practical in the test. Some people, in fact, do use their hand and just kind of block things on the screen. It's possible it may be a bit confusing. What I recommend is really just using your boards and writing down each statement on its own when you're solving it at the top of the page, and then when you move from statement 1 to statement 2, completely erasing statement 1 and only having statement 2 on your screen. All right, so let's move on to our second key now, which is called be yourself, or as I like to call it, be by itself. So I'm going to look at another question here. If x is an integer, is x plus 1 divided by x an integer? Okay, let's look at statement number 1. 2 divided by x is an integer. Okay, so this means x can be 1, 2 divided by 1, it can be 2, it can be minus 2. And this is not enough information to pick between them. So we're going to check off A and D because we don't know. So now let's look at statement number 2. X is a positive even integer. So we can immediately see that combining this with the statement number 1 gives us the answer. If x is a positive even integer, the only one of these three, 1, 2, and minus 2, that fits that is number 2, meaning we have the answer. Boom, statement number C, right? Well, hopefully you guys caught on to what I'm doing here because no, it's wrong. We again here made the mistake of combining the information we shouldn't have. Let's look at statement 2 on its own without using statement 1, right? So if x is a positive even integer, then that means we have an even integer plus 1 divided by an even integer. That means an odd integer divided by an even integer, which is never going to be an integer. 3 divided by 2, 5 divided by 4, never going to be an integer, which gives us our answer. Statement number 2 on its own is sufficient to answer the question. Statement 2b is our answer. And in this question, when we looked at students who answered correctly, it took those who used the logical approach an average about 1 minute and 5 seconds, and those who used the alternative approach, which it would be using numbers, having here x equals 2, x equals 4, it took them about 8 seconds longer, which is not such a big difference. And in this case, what our system will do if you use it is figure out which one is faster, not on average for everyone, but faster for you, according to your personal inclination. The time difference is very small. So the second key is when 1 is not enough, we should not add it to 2 right away. What this showed us is a case where the first question showed us a case where 1 was enough and 2 wasn't, and the second one showed us a case where the opposite was true. What's common is that we have to remember to check both statements on their own before even thinking about combining them. All right, third key, see the full picture. So here's our next question. I'm just going to say, I should have said this before, but I'm going to be solving very, very quickly here. Don't get stressed. We're going to upload all of this later, and you'll be able to, if you want, go over the questions, pause them at your leisure. And we're not going to actually solve the whole thing either, but we're going to go over it quickly to show you the keys that we want to show. And so don't be stressed if I'm moving too fast. So, okay, let's look at this question. In rhombus QRST, what is the length of QS, which is not drawn? All right, so this question deals with a rhombus. Let's quickly remind ourselves of the material here. Rhombus area equals product of diagonals divided by 2, and also equals side times height. So in this figure, all of this translates into QS times RT divided by 2 equals QT times PR. All right, and the question is, what is QS? So let's look at the answers now. PR gives us 9. We have that. And statement number 2 gives us QT. We have that. But even combining both of these together, we're still going to have 2 variables left, QS and RT. And it's obvious, looking at it this way, that both statement number 1 and both statement number 2 are not going to be sufficient to answer it on its own, leading us to eliminate A and B and D as well. And now it looks like even when we combine them, we still have, again, 2 variables left, meaning we're still short, right? Well, hold on a sec. Let's take a deeper look at this question. Another characteristic of a rhombus is that all sides are equal. And this means that QR also equals 15, right? Same as QT using statement number 2. So now we have 2 sides of a right triangle, triangle QRP. Using the Pythagorean theorem, we can figure out QP. And if we have QP, which remember, we don't actually have to calculate it here, we only have to know that it is possible to get QP, that means that we're going to have section PT, right? And drawing RT, section RT, not PT. And drawing RT, we can see that we have another right triangle where we know both sides, PRT. Sorry, no, that did give us PT, but now if we draw RT, which we don't actually have to draw, but we can see we have another right triangle where we know about both sides, triangle PRT. And this time we can figure out RT. RT is what we needed to solve this question, right? If we have RT, that means we have all the variables aside from QS, which means we can find QS, which means C is our answer. Now, I know that was a bit fast and a bit difficult, and I hope you still followed the gist of what I'm saying. Again, you can go over the material yourself later, but the point is, and what this exemplifies is our third key, that combining 1 and 2 may add more information than what we see. What do I mean by that? Well, as we saw here, statements 1 and 2 separately, if we check them, that may not give us enough intuition as to whether combining them will give us the answer. We have to, after we rule out A and B, re-examine the question with the combined info and see what we can do. Often, the sum is greater, the whole, is greater than the sum of our parts, especially in geometry, this is true. The reason being that in geometry, we use a lot of external logic. The combination of the statements can lead us to new information, which can lead us to new conclusions, which is what happened here. So this logical solution is actually quite long. It's a hard question, and it took an average of 2 minutes and 41 seconds to solve correctly. But, hold on tight, this solution, the logical solution, is the solution that 88% of the students who answered correctly used. Right? Students who used, of the students who solved precisely, only 3% used the alternative approach, and only 9% used precise calculations. And most of those who tried the precise approach got it wrong, or didn't get it wrong but spent over 3 minutes, which is also pretty bad. And what our system will do is probably advise you, based on the wisdom of the crowd, to use the logical approach. In this case, I would take this advice. All right. Key number 4, D for divide. Let's look at the next question. What is the volume of a certain rectangular solid? Now, this question is about the volume of a rectangular solid. So again, let's remind ourselves about the relevant formula. Solid volume equals A times B times C. Now let's look at the statements. Statement number 1, the dimensions of the rectangular solid are 2, 4, and 7 respectively. Well, this gives us all 3, right? A and B and C. So statement 1 is definitely enough. I'm going to rule out B, C, and E. That was easy. Now let's look at statement 2. It doesn't give us the length of the sides, but the areas of the faces. Now, since a face's area equals the product of its sides, we can create 3 equations. A times B equals 8, B times C equals 14, and C times A equals 28. Now you might notice that the dimensions mentioned in 1, 2, 4, and 7 give us a solution to these 3 equations, right? 8 is 2 times 4, 14 is 2 times 7, and 28 is 7 times 4. So if we know the dimensions, we can of course calculate the area. So if we have no new information that we didn't already get in statement 1, this means A is the answer, right? Well, wrong, because again, it doesn't matter that statement 2 doesn't add information. That's not the point. We have to look at statement 2 independently. And if we look at statement 2 independently, ignoring statement 1, again, using masking tape if we could, what we're going to notice is that we have here 3 equations with 3 variables, and that's enough for an answer. If we have the same number of equations and variables, it is possible to get to a solution, even if the algebra here might be a bit of work, and we're not going to actually do it because we don't have to. We're only asked if it's possible. So we don't need statement 1 for this. We can solve with only statement 2, and therefore the answer is D, divided. Each statement on its own gives us enough information to solve the question. So our 4th key is when 1 is enough and 2 repeats it, 2 is also enough, and it's not unnecessary. Even if 2 is just a more complicated way to say what statement 1 already told us, that still means they're both independently sufficient for an answer, which is fine. So let's move on to our 5th and final data sufficiency key. Simply simplify the unsimple. All right. $15,000 was invested for 1 year in 2 different funds. A third of the amount was invested in Fund A, which earned K% simple annual interest, and the rest was invested in Fund B, which earned M% simple annual interest. What was the total interest earned that year? All right, so just based on this quick preview into the information, you can glance at the statements. What do you think was the main reason that people got this question wrong? Do you think it was they forgot to check the statements on their own? Do you think it was that they didn't understand the question? Do you think it was that they didn't convert the information into its most uncomplicated form? Do you think it was a calculation area? Or maybe it was that they didn't attend one of these webinars. So get your votes in. Be about 30 seconds for that, and we'll be right back with you. All right, I'm going to give you guys another 10 seconds about. Still a few more of you that haven't voted. But from what I can see so far, the results are pretty unambiguous, pretty clear. Okay, let's wrap it up. So this time I would say you guys saw through what I was asking, and a plurality of you answered, don't convert the information into its most uncomplicated form. Now, for those of you who marked A, forgot to check the statements on their own, you guys get extra credit as far as I'm concerned, because this has definitely been a running theme of the webinar so far, and if that's the one thing you're going to remember from this webinar, I've done my job. But actually, here that isn't what we meant. Here, the main cause of mistakes is, as 43% of you figured out, excuse me, C, not simplifying. Allow me to explain. So, as we've mentioned, data sufficiency questions are, first of all, logical questions. Sometimes we're going to use alternative solutions, such as plugging in numbers, in order to eliminate contradictory answers. But when do we use a precise answer strategy? Remember, precise answer strategy, solving straightforward. Well, we use it when we can simplify the information further than how it's presented. And this question is an example. I'm going to show you what I mean. So 1 gives us the relation between K, the interest percentage of Fund A, and M, the interest percentage of Fund B. K equals 1.5M plus 1. This is one equation with two variables, not enough information to solve. We can rule out answers A and D. What about 2? So 2 is another equation with M and K. Definitely not enough. We can rule out statement B. All right, combining 1 and 2 together should give us two equations with two variables, which is enough to solve, right? Answer choice C. Or is it? Hopefully some of you guys at this point can expect me to be asking that. So what we have here is two equations, true, but do we have two different equations? If we multiply equation number 1, which we should do anyway because fractions are a bit confusing, even though 1.5 isn't a very complicated one, and we always like to use integers if we can. So let's multiply statement number 1 by 2 in order to get full integers, and then we get here 2k equals 3m plus 2, which is exactly the same as statement number 2. Meaning 2 doesn't add information at all. It just repeats what we already know. And since 1 wasn't enough to solve on its own, combining the statement with itself doesn't help. And thus the answer here is E, impossible. So using the precise method in data sufficiency means simplifying the information in order to see the logic. And we should use precise when the information isn't clear enough, because it's not in its simplest form. In most DS questions, our system is going to offer you the logical solution, because these are usually faster by about 30 to 50 seconds than the alternative or the precise. But sometimes when there's simplifications to be done before we can see the logic, then our system is going to offer you the precise solution first. That's true most of the time anyway. You guys might be different personally, and the thing is, the more you use examPAL, the better the system is going to learn how you think and will be able to provide you with kind of the ultimate personalized solutions. Together with using the wisdom of the crowd and over 10,000 students from 130 countries, examPAL can give you the best solution for you. So this last answer key was when 1 is not enough and 2 repeats it. The answer is impossible, and I hope you understand why that was the key. And I'm going to move on quickly here in order to get to our critical reasoning questions. So to summarize the whole first half of our webinar about data sufficiency, really in a nutshell, solve statement number 1 on its own, and then solve statement 2 on its own, and then, and only if necessary, combine them together. And that's really it. All of the keys we gave here were kind of sub-keys of this point. Treating the statements on their own is so crucial, and so many people confuse this simple point. We're thinking of a technique of avoiding this. What I do, again, since I can't bring masking tape to the test, what I do is copy the first statement down, then cross it out when I'm solving the second one, and write the second statement down so I can focus only on it alone. And if I need to combine, then I write both of them down. And some people physically hide bar the screen with their hand. Whatever works for you, go for it. All right, so this concludes the first half of our session. I hope this helped, and we'd love for you guys to tell us in the chat tab what you thought or if some things were unclear. And again, you'll be able to look at the questions on your own later. But now we're going to move on to tackle another topic that many of us find very tricky, critical reasoning. So let's talk about the verbal section in general for just 1 second. The main issue in the verbal section as a whole is that there's never enough time. What makes the verbal so hard is that we have less time here than the quant. We have 41 questions instead of 37 we have in quant. And these questions are a lot more demanding. We have longer texts, lots and lots of details, and we have convincing wrong answers. So since we're going to be seeing, we don't have time to go over all the answers. And the issue of time can be solved by using these, what we call verbal time traps. Because what we're going to learn here is that a clever person solves a problem, but a smart person avoids it, which is kind of the rule we use in critical reasoning. So again, I'm just going to remind you real quickly about our PAL system: precise using just the given data, logical solution using logic from outside, and alternative when we have to using the answers. So here, as well as before, we're going to have 5 different keys, and let's get right to it. The first key we call the although argument. And this is actually the toughest argument for most students. But once you do master this argument, you're going to be able to solve some of the toughest questions. So let's get started with the question, which is taken from our Intro to Critical Reasoning question. Which of the following, if true, does not strengthen the argument that control over fire is the reason for earlier humans' extended lifespan? Now here, I'm just going to say, even more than in data sufficiency, we're really not going to solve the questions completely. I'm not going to even read all the answers, just going to show you parts of them in order to illustrate keys that I want. And again, don't worry, you'll be able to go over it later. So we are asked here, which does not strengthen the argument that control over fire is the reason for the extended lifespan? So the most common mistake in this question comes from what we've marked here, misunderstanding answer choice D. So let's focus on this. In the century after the discovery of fire, a plague killed 20% of the early human population. Okay, so the argument says fire is good for human life. And this is telling us that actually in the period after fire was introduced, something very bad happened to human life. So this weakens the argument, making C our answer, right? Well, sorry about that. Wait a minute. We know human life, we know already from before, from the statement, from the question that is, that human life did increase. The question assumes that the human life increased. When it asks us, what is the reason for the extended lifespan, that means we know it happened. And the question is not whether it increased or not. The question is whether fire helped. And what's being pointed out here in statement D is that human life increased even though a different factor other than fire, the plague, had caused an opposite effect. So the although here actually strengthens the argument. Although something negative happened, fire was so much of a positive factor that it overcame this negative factor, the plague, and still caused an overall positive effect. Although it was supposed to be shorter, it was longer. Fire made it longer. So think about this like a race, okay? If you see a race and you see one guy beating another guy to the finish line, as you do here, you're probably going to conclude that the first guy is faster, the guy on the left. But now imagine that you see the whole race from the beginning, and the guy on the right actually got a head start of 100 feet. So now you know for sure that the first guy is much faster. And this is what happened in our first key. If, although something negative occurred, we still get the outcome we wanted or needed, it strengthens the claim that the cause contributed to the outcome. So this question we solved using precise, and our data shows that on this question, students used alternative, which means actually reading all of the answer choices and looking for the answer in them, took on average 30 seconds longer. Might not sound like a lot, but if you think about it, 30 seconds really adds up in many questions over. So let's look at our next key. Outer knowledge, inner wisdom. Now here we're going to talk about logic. And knowing what kind of logic to look for can really save us a lot of time. So again, let's read just the question stem. Many new office buildings have emerged in Saint Martin, virtually doubling the available office space. The city is expected to maintain its population and does not currently have any shortage of office space. Nevertheless, investors have almost tripled the amount they were willing to pay for any available office space or any future building projects in the city. Which of the following, if true, most justifies the investors' willingness to pay more for office space in Saint Martin? So don't even look at the answers yet, but rather answer me this question. What do you think this question primarily revolves around? Is it the concept of causality? Is it the logic behind pricing? Is it the structure of the passage? Is it evaluation of different answer choices? Or is it spotting contradictions? This is, I know, maybe a little bit more complicated than our other polls, but think of what you think the question is about based on what you saw. All right, 20 more seconds, guys. About half of you haven't voted yet. All right, I'm going to wrap it up in about 5 more seconds. Okay, cool. So pretty good mix here. Most of you guys, not most, but the plurality of you guys said spotting contradictions, which is interesting. So let's go over it. Those of you who marked A, the concept of causality, well, that's fine because, of course, there is causality involved. And those of you who marked spotting contradictions, interesting. I'd actually be happy if one of you explains to me in the chat why you think that is. Because what I meant actually here is option B, which is the logic behind pricing. Now, why is that? So for a second, let me digress and talk about the GMAT in general. Obviously, the GMAT is an admission exam to business school. And what this means is that very often, the GMAT is looking to see if we understand business reasoning and verbal questions. So now let's look at this question from a business point of view. What could just justify the investor's willingness to spend more on the product, office space? So using the logic of pricing, we're quickly going to be seeing that they must be expecting a higher profit, right? And a higher profit can either come from lower cost or higher revenue. Since the passage tells us that their costs are actually higher, 3 times as high, in fact, we know that we're looking for an answer choice, which is going to give us a reason that involves higher revenue. And that's exactly what answer C here provides. A new stock market is about to be launched in Saint Martin and is expected to attract many finance and service companies that can afford higher rental rates. So the point here is that we could figure out almost exactly what we're looking for before going through the answer choices. And this is an important point. Not only is reading all the answers time-consuming, it can also be really misleading. It's like meeting 5 people who tell you a story, And you know 4 of them are lying, but they're all trained actors, really persuasive, and they tell us these stories and we get wrapped in and listening to all this irrelevant information. We don't want to listen to them. We're much better off figuring out exactly what we're looking for before we let these actors speak. And that way we won't be fooled. So our second key, our second key is when a question deals with issues such as pricing, range, argument, argument structure, or average, we should use our logic before using the answers. And this question showed us what logical critical reasoning question looks like. We use external business logic, which doesn't appear in the question, but which we know. And in the course, you're going to be exposed to all of the different kinds of business logic that you might need to use in the test. All right, onward. Third key, don't look for an answer, answer. Here we're going to talk about precise solutions, how we can solve using just the data in the question stem without even resorting to external knowledge. Okay, with continuously growing populations, developing countries are purchasing many genetically modified GNC plants, whose yields are substantially higher than those of regular plants. However, GNC opponents claim that since the consequences of such vast use are not clear yet, these countries' governments must avoid the use of GNC plants at this time. Which of the following, if true, most weakens the claim of the GNC opponents? So, again, I'm not going to read the answers here because we don't have time. The first thing to notice is that we're actually being asked what exactly we're being asked to weaken here. We're being asked to weaken the claim of the GNC opponents. So there are two rival claims here, right? The GNC supporters claim and the GNC opponents claim. And let's identify the basis of each of these claims. So the claim supporting GNC isn't actually stated explicitly here, but the word with in with continuously growing populations serves to imply that this is a reason. As in, because populations are growing, GNC plants which yield more food are needed. The opponent's claim, meanwhile, rests on the fact that the consequences are unknown and thus may be harmful, right? Maybe they have bad health effects. So these are our two claims. Continuously growing populations need it, and on the other hand, we don't know it. So now we know what we're looking for, either a strengthening of the first one or a weakening of the second one, or the best option, a comparison of the two, something that tells us that the first is a stronger claim. And this is exactly what answer choice E here gives us. Let's read it. The immediate consequences of hunger resulting from an insufficient food supply in developing countries are far more severe compared to potential future health hazards. In other words, the reason supporting GNC, continuously growing populations need more food, is more important, far more severe than the consequences of such vast use not being clear. It's basically like you see two people arguing, and what you're telling me is that one of them is correct, or if you tell me that the other one is wrong, it's the same thing. And the best would be if you tell me one of them is more correct than the other one, which is what we have here. Basically, statement E tells us directly the first argument is more important, more persuasive than the second argument. Now notice here that this was a precise answer. What I mean is we formulated the description of the answer on our own, and only then did we go looking for it. Meaning we read the answer choices A through E, which we didn't actually do here, but solving the question is what we would do, knowing what we're looking for and not allowing ourselves to be persuaded by the different answer choices. And as you can see, and as we previously discussed, this is a lot more efficient than going through all the choices. Which brings us to our third key. The answers are confusing and time-consuming. We should come up with our own answers before going over all of the answers and paying attention to every detail. So I'm just going to quickly recap our PAL system once again, since it's so basic to everything we do here. Precise is using just the given data, logical using logic from outside, and alternative means when we have to, use the answers. This brings us to our fourth key, spotting the irrelevant answers. And here we're going to use the option choice we haven't discussed yet in critical reasoning, which is alternative, right? When we have to, using the answers. So let's look at the question here. Growing wheat in 500 to 200 BC in the region of Damchan required the use of large quantities of water for irrigation, which had to be brought from remote locations. And yet, the Damchan people kept growing wheat, although they had the option to grow other, less water-demanding crops, such as vegetables. Which of the following, if true, most helps to explain the Damchan's preference to grow wheat during the period of 500 to 200 BC? All right, again, let's not read answer choices yet and just talk about it for a second. We're being asked here to identify a solution or an explanation for a mysterious phenomenon. Why did they grow wheat? Now, if you have an answer that comes to mind that you want to use, then perhaps you can use the precise or the logical system here. But I don't know about you, I can't. I don't have something that from this question stem as obvious to me as the answer. And that's what makes this a classic alternative question. It's not immediately obvious what the answers should be, and so it makes sense to compare the answers. But of course, we have to do so critically. All right, let's read them. A. There's no evidence of wheat growing agriculture in Damchan before 500 BC. Well, this is irrelevant because we're asked about the period between 500 and 200 BC. Right? Remember, in BC, all the numbers work opposite, so before 500 is numbers that are larger, such as 600. Anyway, this is not the relevant range of time. Irrelevant. All right. Option B is similarly irrelevant because it describes something these days, right? I don't even have to read the answer choices, the whole answer. Just knowing that it talks about these days means it probably isn't going to be relevant to the relevant era of 500, 200 BC. Now, what about C? Most of the Damchan farmers of that time were unable to choose their preferred crops, as they were ordered to grow wheat by the ruler of the region. All right, this looks promising. It tells us the reason that the farmers planted the crops. But wait a minute. What we're asked is why the Damchan people in general made the choice of planting these crops, not why the rulers did. And answer choice C begs the question, why did the ruler order them to grow the wheat? And we don't know the answer to this, and thus this is not our answer. What about answer choice D? Other crops that demanded intensive irrigation were not grown in the Damchan region during the period of 500 to 200 BC. Well, we don't care about other crops. We care about wheat. And so again, this isn't helpful. So using process of elimination, we realize it's going to be answer choice E. And let's actually look at it. Damchan was often attacked by rival cities and thus relied on wheat, which could be preserved more effectively in comparison to other crops during long periods of siege. So this is what we're looking for. This is a legitimate reason for wheat to be grown. Now, what all this demonstrated is our fourth key. If we must use the answer, we should first summarize the given argument and then compare small details with each answer. Summarizing the given argument, I recommend literally summarizing it, writing down a very, very short summary of even 4 words on the top of our page. Something led to something, or something led to a question mark, and then we know what we're looking for. So that was our fourth key. Now we're moving on to our fifth and final key. I hope you guys are excited. I know I am. Fifth key, the happy face of bold-faced questions. All right, let's talk about this for a second. A lot of people, sorry about that, are really afraid of bold-faced questions. But the truth is they're really not very hard if we get to know them. They always revolve around the same logic, which is the logic behind argument structure. And they always ask the same question. What are the roles of the two bold-faced portions? So really all we have to always do is use the evidence and the assumptions in order to get to a conclusion. Right? This is always an argument structure. And bold-faced questions always basically ask us what is the argument structure here, or more specifically, what role do the bold-faced sections play? Are they in this? Are they the evidence? Are they the assumptions? Are they the conclusion? Is each one of them a different part? Let's look at this question. According to the latest census, the population of Oak City grew at an unprecedented rate last year, raising expectations for yet even greater growth this year. Factors that contribute to the increase in the number of city residents are either population growth or immigration. But the birth rate in Oak City has been declining steadily, and according to most recent estimations, the number of families immigrating to the city excuse me, will be quite similar to that of previous years, probably contributing a comparable number of new residents. One may project with a considerable degree of certainty that Oak City will not accomplish its goal to surpass its previous record. In the given argument, the two portions in boldface play which of the following roles? All right, so here we, even more than usual in critical reasoning questions, should definitely not read the answer choices before we figure out on our own what part the actual boldface questions play. So the whole first part here of the statement, which I have just marked yellow, is facts, objective data, straight from the latest sentence. The next sentence starts with a but, and thus presents a counterfact. Also a fact, but one that points in an opposite direction. Now let's keep reading now. Estimations, as well as the word probably, tell us that what we're told in this boldface portion is some kind of assessment. And the word but, which was the beginning of the statement, tells us it's probably one that points in a certain direction. Now, one may project, at the beginning of the last sentence, tells us the second boldface portion, is definitely a projection. Let's read it. One may project with a considerable degree of certainty that Oak City will not accomplish its goal to surpass its previous record. Okay, so this projection is directly based on the assessment which the second portion presented. If the number of residents won't grow, then Oak City will not break the record. So the first bold-faced portion is an assessment, and the second one is a conclusion which derives from the entire argument. And that's the bottom line, and we can figure this out completely on our own, and only after that go and look at the answer choices and see that this is what answer choice A tells us. It's in fact exactly what it tells us. The first portion is an assessment, which, if correct, would strengthen the main statement of the argument expressed in the second portion. Precisely. So this brings us to our fifth and our final key. Bold-faced questions always follow the same logic. Evidence plus assumptions lead us to the conclusion. This is pretty simple, and it always repeats itself. A lot of people find these questions kind of confusing or maybe even stressful, because sometimes the order is mixed up. We're going to have assumptions and then evidence and then conclusion, or we can start with a conclusion and only later get the evidence and assumptions for them. And our goal is to figure out really what the right order is and where the evidence, assumptions, and conclusion are. All we have to do is seek out the three components and then identify what part the bold-faced sections play in them. So, to recap, answer before reading the answers. Again, if you guys leave here today remembering one thing about critical reasoning, this would be this, right? In Datasufficiency, it was solve all of them on their own, and here it's answer before reading the answers. It's the first commandment of critical reasoning questions. Only way, and I mean this literally, the only way to solve all of the questions in the test in the time the test gives us is not to read all the answer choices, but when we can, which is most of the time, figure out before what we're looking for and only then read the answer choices. So that basically sums up most of what we talked about today. And we're gonna, before we conclude, we have offers here for you just to show as a token of our gratitude. And for the next 48 hours, for you guys and only for you guys who attended this webinar, all of our examPALs packages are going to be 25% off. If you guys want to take us up on this offer, just go to our site and use the following coupon at checkout. And don't forget, you guys have a 30-day money-back guarantee if you decide not to use this coupon eventually, which is fine. And also, if you go to accepted.com and buy an MBA package, you get all of our premium package for free. So you go to accepted.com/MBA/application packages with GMAT. We'll have this up on the screen later if you guys want the links. Don't worry about it. So that's our offer. And I really hope you guys found this helpful. And I hope to see you on our next webinar in 2 weeks' time. If you want to join us, it's going to be on a different topic. Make sure you register for a free account on examPAL.com/GMAT to be notified of the specific time and date. And if you guys have any questions, please ask them now in the chat, and we're gonna hang around here and answer anything you want. So thank you guys for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.